how to drive meaningful change. Promoting gender equality in science is not just a moral imperative, it's essential for scientific excellence, innovation, and sustainable development. And through IDRC-supported research across Africa and Latin America, this report highlights the barriers that women encounter in STEM fields and presents actionable solutions to foster greater inclusion and leadership. Our conversation is especially timely as we marked earlier this week the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So happy International Day of Women and Girls in Science to all of you. And it's also the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So those of you who have as many gray hairs as I do will remember well that conference. Those are two major milestones in advancing gender equality worldwide. I look forward to an engaging discussion with our panelists on the report's findings and its implications. But before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. Today's session includes live interpretation in French and Spanish via the Kudo plugin in Teams. To access interpretation, click on the Kudo button in the toolbar on the top of your right of your screen and select your preferred language. Nous utilisons l'interprétation de Kudo pour cette rencontre. Pour activer l'interprétation, cliquez sur le bouton Kudo situé dans la barre d'outils en haut de votre écran et choisissez la langue de votre choix. Now it's my pleasure to hand the floor to IDRC's Vice President of Programs and Partnerships, Santiago Alba-Corral, to say a few words. Santiago?
Merci, Nasser. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being with us today in your morning, evening, afternoon, across the globe. I also speaking from you to you from Ottawa, that, as Nasser mentioned, is the land of the Algonquin and Isanabi people. And for the ones of you that don't know Ottawa, Ottawa is in the middle of 3 rivers. And this was in a space for generations and generations where people met to negotiate, to discuss, to celebrate. And we really want to have you today in that space, to create that space with all of you of celebration, of sharing knowledge, and sharing knowledge among some of the most important discussions these days is the role of women and girls in science. La Journée internationale des femmes et des filles de sciences met à l'honneur l'accès et votre participation dans la science et la technologie. C'est une opportunité pour célébrer une recherche plus inclusive, plus innovante et de reconnaître que les talents des féminins occupent une place essentielle dans le secteur de la recherche. Aujourd'hui, c'est une journée, c'est une semaine qui nous va permettre de voir les rôles que vous jouez et que c'est essentiel pour montrer des services et des résultats à la communauté scientifique et technologique. Et votre participation doit être toujours renforcée. In 2020, IDRC launched a new strategic plan, and we understood that we couldn't advance in science, technology, social change, policy change. There's nothing that we can do in solving the major challenges of the 21st century if we are not more inclusive, if we don't understand how inequalities are a barrier for many to actually be part of the solution. We know that diversity and inclusion in research teams is about the quality of the research. We know that when we move the needle on gender equality, when we bring more women in the research efforts, what we get is better research, more sustainable, more impactful, and also with more points of view that more communities, more individuals, more policymakers are going to be better prepared to provide services and to serve the communities in need. The transformation that we need to see in order to respond to the challenges of our generation need to understand that diversity and inclusion. And in particular, the role of women and girls in science. Our Education and Science Division, that Nasser is the director, has a core objective in support women as the center of how they became leaders, to be strong, to be equitable, and to create science systems that can provide better solutions and better space for dialogue. For instance, recently through the Early Career Fellowship led by the Organization for Women in Science in the Developing World, IDRC has supported already more than 100 women to be scientists in the Global South. They are establishing research activities, they are developing laboratories, 11 of them only in 2023 are new laboratories in their communities. They are working in building research groups, and they are addressing some of the critical development challenges on your own home countries. When we look at our work in breaking barriers in gender, the STEM investments, that we are going to see today a report for 5 fantastic experts that are with us. We are going to see the impact, the importance of this change, and how important it is for IDRC investing in this area. Not only to understand what are the barriers that women continually facing to play leadership roles and to contribute to science and technology, but the changes that need to happen at the institutional level. We know that change happens when individuals are leaders of their own transformation, but the big part of that transformation needs to happen also at the institutional level. The barriers are outside sometimes of the own capacities of the individuals. That's why the investments of IDRC are looking at that systemic change that is going to create a landscape and a space for a greater impact of all the individuals, rather than just only investing in those individuals that then they will be alone without that space to really bring everything that you have. The report that we are going to see today look at how research can help us actually in those changes, how it can help us in changing institutions, changing policies, in changing behaviors, and actually in changes for the better. I'm really looking forward to hear from the panelists today, because we know that in order to have the best research, the best knowledge, the best science, the best technology, the best mathematics, the best social and policy change, we cannot do it without the 50% of the population. It will be not fair to fight a so difficult fight with a hand tied to our back. So we need the 2 hands, and we know we need all of you, and we are really happy to support and to celebrate a week of success and a week of the role that you all, women and girls, they play in the space of science and technology. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to hear from all of you. Over to you, Nasser.
Thanks so much, Santiago, and particularly for emphasizing how important addressing inequality is, and moving towards inclusion for all of IDRC's work, and the importance of changes at the institutional level. So let's untie the hands that are tied behind our backs. So let's move forward. Let's hear from the panelists. Before we do, I want to recognize my colleague Matilda Di Pieri, whose camera is on now. She has been working very hard on this program within IDRC. She's in my team, a key member of the team, and so she's going to provide an overview of the synthesis report and its findings to all of you. So Matilda, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nasser, and hello to everyone joining us here today. I'm just sharing my screen, and I hope everyone can see my presentation here. Perfect. It's really an honor to be with all of you today as we launch the Breaking Barriers, Building Bridges synthesis report. This report presents a significant milestone for IDRC, as well as for our collective efforts to advance gender equality in STEM fields. I joined these efforts only recently, but these investments are aimed at dismantling the systemic and systematic barriers that hinder women's participation in leadership in STEM, and these go much further back. What we have now begun to refer to as the Breaking Barriers Network is actually a group of dedicated researchers from across Latin America and Africa that IDRC has worked with in recent initiatives. It's a group that I had the pleasure of joining in Addis Ababa last July, where we undertook a really important agenda setting and writing workshop. This report is a product of the collaboration and the collective thinking of our research partners. Some of them have graciously joined us on our panel discussion today, and I can see that some others are with us online. Feel free to introduce yourselves to everyone in the chat. I want to take the opportunity to thank all of you for being here, as well as everyone who contributed to this work. I hope the images in the screen help put a picture to our network, the network that we've built together. This report is just a snapshot of the findings and the impacts of the various projects within this network. While I will go over some of the key findings that you will, with all of you today, I invite you to explore the report yourselves and dive deeper into the research of each of the projects. The report is actually available in English, French, and Spanish, and you'll be able to access it in the link in the chat. Now, let's get into it. In recent years, awareness of gender inequities in STEM has grown significantly, in many parts thanks to our colleagues in UNESCO that have helped bring visibility to these issues and organize relevant stakeholders around some key areas of action. That being said, there remains a notable evidence gap in tried and effective strategies specifically tailored to tackle the barriers women face in progressing and succeeding in STEM fields in the Global South. This report aims to bridge that gap, providing insights that guide future initiatives and policy development. Research plays a pivotal role in advancing our efforts. It provides the evidence base needed to understand the way forward. It's through rigorous data collection, analysis, and dissemination that research has informed the development of targeted interventions and policies that are both effective and sustainable, some of which I'm hoping our panelists will get a chance to touch on today. These teams have been working on solutions with interregional education institutions, learning from some of the most marginalized women in STEM, like those living in rural communities in Latin America, and breaking into male-dominated fields like engineering and agricultural sciences. Even across this diverse set of projects and contexts they're working in, one thing is clear. This is not a simple problem. The gender gap hasn't budged in over a decade, and achieving gender equity in STEM, making sure the sector is supportive for everyone, requires a multifaceted approach involving multiple and as many stakeholders really as possible. Now let's get into some of the details in our report. Our research highlights several key areas where targeted interventions can make a very significant impact. I'll start off with building gender responsive and equitable STEM institutions. Projects within the network have worked diligently to institutionalize gender-responsive policies that promote equity and inclusivity. Formal mentorship programs, scholarship programs, and gender audits are just some of the examples of the initiatives that have created safer, more inclusive environments for women in STEM already. We also have how leveraging data can work to address gender disparities. So comprehensive data collection and digitalization efforts have been prioritized to understand and address disparities in STEM in our projects. By integrating gender analysis into STEM research, we're uncovering valuable insights into how gender dynamics influence STEM success, contributing to more informed and effective policy interventions. We're also fostering leadership and mentorship for women in STEM in our projects. Creating leadership and mentorship pathways for marginalized women is a crucial step. Programs that provide technical skills, build confidence, and foster leadership capacities enable women to participate in research, agenda setting, and policy development. And then, very importantly, we have initiatives that support or ensure that we're moving across education and career pathways. So developing multi-level support systems for what helps women transition successfully from their STEM education into the workforce. Our projects have seen curriculum revisions, capacity building initiatives, and reintegration programs for new mothers, just as some of the efforts that ensure continuity of support for women in STEM. This report includes several case studies that highlight the tangible impacts of these initiatives. In Zimbabwe, gender audits and mainstreaming strategies have improved accountability and created more inclusive environments in university settings. In Colombia, experiential learning opportunities and green technologies have empowered women and promoted gender equity in STEM. In East Africa, the East African Supervision and Mentorship Framework has paved a pathway for strengthening connections between women researchers and mentors, providing critical resources, guidance, and encouragement to navigate their STEM careers. Our Breaking Barriers research has shown that comprehensive programs combining educational interventions with organizational learning processes are effective in promoting gender equity. Participatory research methods ensure that women's perspectives are included and that they're addressed, leading to more gender-sensitive research approaches overall. Mentorship and role models are crucial. These are crucial for inspiring and supporting young women in STEM. And then we find that effective policy integration and implementation is also essential for supporting women's inclusion in leadership roles. Our network demonstrates the potential for impactful change through targeted interventions and collaborative efforts. Our report lays out a research agenda and recommended next steps for some of the key stakeholders that we've identified. We invite you to explore these recommendations in our report, and it's my pleasure to announce that this report is just the beginning. Towards the end of the year, IDRC will be publishing a book bringing together chapters from a dozen of our projects from the Breaking Barriers Network. These detailed case studies will provide relevant, place-based insights on what's working and what is needed to help us achieve gender equity in STEM. I'll now turn it back to Nasser and our researchers to dig into some of the examples that I've touched on from their own work and discuss how we can continue to break barriers and build bridges, creating a future where everyone has the opportunity to strive in STEM. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matilda. Along with some of the promising examples you've given where we may see some change, and we'll discuss in the case studies, I was really struck when you said the gender gap has not budged in a decade, something that we really want to work on. So let's get into that and start discussing it. Just a word of context first. So we know that what evidence exists on gender biases and systemic barriers, it comes primarily from Western and Northern contexts, even the statistics that we have on gender barriers. So our research explores these challenges in Africa and Latin America through 15 case study projects. And we really aimed at identifying context-specific obstacles and solutions to advance gender equality in STEM, as well as what are the common challenges across regions and the common strategies. And each of the panelists that I'm about to introduce have led a research case study featured in the report. So let us meet them. So first, I'm going to introduce Dr. Paula Vasquez, and I'll ask the panelists to turn on their cameras as I introduce them. So Paula is a civil engineer and environmental leader at Universidad Autónoma de Occidente in Colombia. Her work promotes sustainable development and gender equity, earning her the UN Momentum for Change Award for leadership in inclusive green growth. Welcome, Paula. Next, we have Flora Karimi. Dr. Flora Karimi is the head of research and capacity strengthening at the African Population and Health Research Center. She has over 20 years of experience leading initiatives such as the Consortium for Advanced Research Training, strengthening research capacity and educational quality in East Africa. Welcome, Flora. And we also have Dominica Chingarande. Dr. Chingarande is a sociologist and vice chancellor of the Women's University in Africa. She plays a key role in shaping gender equality and climate change policies in Zimbabwe and across Africa, and through her work on regional and international advisory boards. She is connected and influential in these fields. So welcome, Dominica. I also want to introduce Dr. Anna Persik, who is our discussant, who's going to provide closing remarks. Anna is a program specialist for science, technology, and innovation policy at UNESCO. Anna is an ecologist by training and coordinates UNESCO's call to action for closing the gender gap in science, aimed at driving institutional change to advance the sustainable development goals. Really happy to partner with UNESCO on this panel and work with you going forward in closing that gender gap. Welcome, Anna. All right, so I'd like to welcome once more all of our panelists. Looking forward to an engaging discussion. And I'm going to start by asking each panelist to make a 5-minute maximum presentation of the key messages that they would like to share from their case study. We asked them to think about getting stuck in the elevator with the minister that is relevant to this issue in their country, and having the opportunity to really try to influence policy, tell them about their case study, what are the outcomes and some of the recommendations. So Paula, we are going to start with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm Paula Vasquez. I'm leader of one of the projects funded by IDRC, which was developed in Colombia, South America. And we were focused on a critical issue, which is global sustainability, that issue that could be even more pressing in developing countries like Colombia. And the problem here is the low participation of women in those jobs that require environmental and technical skills, what we call green STEM skills. So women are still underrepresented in key areas like renewable energy, sustainable construction, wastewater reuse systems. And if we don't act fast, they will continue to be left behind in the green economy. So to tackle this challenge, our project partnered with SENA. SENA is our Colombian institution, public institution for technical and vocational education. And our goal here was clear: to strengthen women's role in these green STEM TVET careers. So we started by identifying main barriers, and then design innovative strategies to try to remove them throughout the educational process. What results were achieved? I could summarize that in positive change. Changes attitudes, beliefs, teaching practices at both individual and also organizational levels that are helping to advance this gender equity in STEM. So let me highlight 3 key aspects that made this possible. The first one, combining soft and hard strategies. We found in the gender baseline that women face diverse barriers. These go from low competence in STEM skills to limited access to technical knowledge and green technologies. And that's why we decided to combine professionals from both type of disciplines, social scientists and also from STEM fields, so we could have a more comprehensive educational process and achieve this development of soft and hard skills that are necessary to really have this integrated approach and have a much more, like a greater impact. So by doing this, apprentices didn't only learn how to operate green technologies, but also our female apprentices learn or build this confidence to see themselves as capable of doing it with the necessary skills to succeed. Second key point, experiential learning. We introduced hands-on environmental pilot projects, taking learning outside the classroom into real-world settings. So our female apprentices work together with female STEM role models like environmental engineers, sustainability experts, designing and operating green technologies on the ground in polluting businesses. This approach increased their knowledge, built confidence, and broke gender stereotypes by witnessing how these real women, STEM experts, were leading the transformation of polluting industries into greener activities. And the third point, a collaborative multi-stakeholder approach. That was key, to involve external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. When it comes to external stakeholders, we gotta be aware that it's not only the responsibility of educational institutions to promote gender equity in STEM, it's the responsibility of many stakeholders. So that's why we made sure that we invited or get on board stakeholders like environmental authorities, female consultants, private sectors, local communities, for example, for these active learning scenarios on the ground. From the design of these scenarios to the implementation phase. And this led us to more accurate strategies or activities with a greater impact. And when it comes to internal actors, yes, we have to work with different staff within SENA, our Tibet institution, but what was key for us was to involve different hierarchies. We worked with instructors, but also with coordinators, with directors, so it was easy for us to adopt, but also to replicate and to start externalizing or scaling up to these strategies. So before I wrap, I want to leave you with a key message. Remember that sustainability is not possible without gender equity in STEM. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paula. And I think you set the mark for a super comprehensive and concise presentation. I'm really looking forward to delving into that a little bit more. I think what we're going to do, audience, is we'll run through each one of the panelists' presentations first, and then we'll go to questions. So, Flora, I'm going to go next to you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for this opportunity. The study that we carried out was a study that touched on examining the participation and experience of women in postgraduate training in STEM programs at the universities in East Africa. We focused on the postgraduate training because we realized that that's where the workforce comes from. That's where our leaders come from. That is where we expect our researchers to come from. And so if we don't have quality in this area, we don't have a good representation of women in this area, especially in the area of STEM, then this is negatively impacting the region. And so we decided to begin with East Africa region and carry out this study in collaboration with a strategic partner who was the Inter-University Council for East Africa. That was a strategic partner for us because then they were able to get into the space of the universities and be able to bring them on board in this particular project. And one of the aspects that was so clear to us was that, as we have always mentioned, that the women were underrepresented in the area of STEM, postgraduate training, both at the master's and also at the doctoral level. And so if they were being underrepresented, especially in the area of STEM, it meant then that they are not giving the maximum contribution that is needed in this particular area. And we went out and asked ourselves, what is the cause of this? And the causes of this underrepresentation touched on three specific areas: the individual woman, the institution, it could be the university, it could be the research institution, or it could also be the systemic or societal aspects. All these areas were critical in determining whether the woman was going to participate or whether they were going to back up from participating in STEM areas. And so we went on and asked ourselves, what are some of the key aspects that seem to be coming up, especially in terms of enablers of the participation of women in STEM at the postgraduate training? And it was so clear to us that supervision and mentorship were so critical in promoting the quality of postgraduate training of women in STEM. More so, taking also the angle of role modeling of the leaders who are also around. So we focused in and asked ourselves, what is it in supervision that needs to be improved? And what does supervision mean to the different stakeholders we have? And it was clear to us that supervision was more or less a formal way of supporting postgraduate students through their studies. That is what our stakeholders, or even the respondents we had, seemed to be saying. While on the other end, mentorship was really considered to be more of a relational kind of support or informal kind of support of seniors to their mentees. However, In the area of supervision, there seems to be a quality issue. The quality of supervision was considered to be weak, especially in the postgraduate training, while when it came to mentorship, we had very few mentors, and we also had very few institutions giving priority to mentorship as a whole. And so its execution and commitment to mentorship was not too focused. And so we went on and asked ourselves, how can we engage with our different stakeholders? And this is something that we brought on board from the beginning of the study. We asked ourselves, how can we engage more with our stakeholders so that then there's buy-in and so that there's commitment in whatever strategies we need to develop towards supervision, improved supervision, and improved mentorship that will result in greater participation of women in STEM postgraduate training programs. And there are quite a number of workshops that we carried out, workshops to validate the results that we got, workshops to co-create a framework that was necessary for supervision and mentorship. Just to mention some of the desirable areas that were brought up and which may have been common to both supervision and mentorship. Our stakeholders seem to be saying, yes, we need to have gender sensitivity in terms of supervision and also in terms of mentorship. We need to have appropriate supervisors' attributes brought up. And that's the same thing with mentorship. We need attributes of a mentor. And they spelled some of the attributes out. Some of them touched on empathy, concern, someone who's concerned, commitment, someone who's knowledgeable in the area. The other aspect was the need of accountability from the side of mentorship, but also on the side of supervision. And finally, capacity strengthening of the mentors so that then they are gender sensitive as they approach the women in the different programs. So finally, what we came up with was a gender-led supervision and mentorship framework, which was co-created with the different stakeholders from the East African region. This is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. And the specific framework had 4 particular areas that were of focus: execution and management of supervision and mentorship, capacity strengthening, the need for greater stakeholders engagement, and the need for quality control and assurance and quality enhancement. And so this particular framework was approved at the East African region. And we are glad to say that the reason why it was approved is because we brought all stakeholders together and there was ownership and commitment. So with that, that's where I will leave my elevator speech for now and back to NASA. Thank you.
Thanks, Flora. Yep, the elevator doors opened. Really looking forward to hearing more about this gender supervision and mentoring framework. Congratulations for having it approved at the East African region level. Dominica, we're on to you, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, NASA. A good day, everyone. Our study was specifically focusing on women's university in Africa as a case study. In particular, the title was Bridging the Gender Gap in Science at Women's University in Africa. It was actually informed by the background that the government of Zimbabwe is committed to gender equality across various or across all sectors, including higher education. As far back as 1995, within the higher education sector, the government of Zimbabwe introduced affirmative action, which meant that female students or female applicants would get into the university with 2 points less than their male counterparts. That did not result in traction regarding gender equality in science disciplines. In 2002, the Women's University in Africa was then established as a mechanism to address gender disparities in university education. So since its establishment, there was no comprehensive study that had been conducted to establish the achievements that the university had registered in the area of gender equality and women empowerment as an institution that had been developed or established for that particular reason. So we set out to establish the achievements, the challenges, the constraints that the university was actually encountering in delivering its mandate. We used a unique methodology, the gender audit methodology, to generate the required data for this particular study. The gender audit methodology entailed a comprehensive assessment of the whole institution. I would say an institution-wide approach to gender analysis, focusing on the organizational culture, looking at composition of females in leadership positions, in lectureship positions across various departments and faculties. It also looked at staff capacity to mainstream or integrate gender. It also looked at issues around policies, what policies are in place to promote gender equality, what institutional architecture in terms of gender focal persons, gender departments, or gender desks are in place to foster gender equality within the institution, issues of gender responsive pedagogy, issues of gender responsive budgeting, issues of gender responsive infrastructure, equipment, technology, including gender responsive services broadly, which also then included our STEM disciplines. So we looked at the whole framework within the institution to try and establish the extent to which they promoted gender equality in STEM disciplines. So one of the key findings was related to gender, the need for a gender responsive institution. When we went through an analysis of the infrastructure, the equipment, and the technology that students were using, particularly those students who were in science disciplines. By the way, we engaged with staff, we engaged with students, we also engaged with alumni and other stakeholders that are in the higher and tertiary education sector in Zimbabwe. So one of the key findings was that the equipment and infrastructure at the university then was not responsive to the unique needs, experiences, and challenges of the female student that had enrolled within the science disciplines. So one particular case study related to animal science, where the female students were finding it difficult to perform well and also to navigate the terrain in that particular discipline as a result of the heavy equipment that was used within that particular discipline. What they said was that because of their unique background as females, they were actually accustomed to working with small livestock. But in this particular discipline, the requirement was for them to work with, in the majority of cases, large livestock. So to them, they found it very difficult to navigate this particular terrain in terms of the large livestock itself and also the equipment that was required to support education in this particular area. So in this regard, we realized that it was therefore necessary for institutions to be gender responsive, ensure that the equipment that is used is accustomed to the kind of female student who has no background in working with large livestock. So there was need for gender responsive infrastructure, technology, facilities, and equipment to support the female students in science disciplines, including gender responsive pedagogy. So that was one key takeaway, which I think is also a takeaway message for us today, for us to make sure that we have gender responsive institutions. Secondly, there was also an issue related to ensuring that within the institutions themselves, there is need for acknowledging that gender issues do not start and end at higher education level. They start at the family level. They also continue at primary and secondary level. They even continue to higher education and to industry and commerce, or to the labor market, if I may say. So the need to address gender issues in STEM should not be a responsibility of the higher education sector only, but it should be a responsibility for everyone. So an ecosystems approach should be taken to address these issues. We were led to that conclusion by the fact that there was lots of gender stereotyping when it comes to choice of subjects at higher education level and tertiary level, as well as including at primary and secondary level, including as well within the labor market itself, industry and commerce, as long as the infrastructure, the equipment, the facilities, the work environment is not supportive of the female graduates, it would then remain a challenge for higher education institutions to continue to support female students in science disciplines, because they will continue to be limited in terms of numbers as a result of the stereotyping, as a result of the lack of support and infrastructure for them to go through the pipeline. So an ecosystems approach, a multi-stakeholder approach is required for us to be able to address and foster equity in science in university education. So those are the key takeaways from our study. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nasa.
Thanks so much, Dominica. And I think this ecosystem approach that you mentioned is something that we really want to get into. So it's time for the question and answer period. We'll take about 30 minutes for this, and if we have time, we'll take some, two or three questions from the audiences as well. Let's see how we do. Paula, I want to ask the first question to you. You talked about the different components of the training that you've done with SENA, and you talked about experiential learning, and you said that that's helpful for breaking down stereotypes. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean? What type of stereotypes, and how did that work?
Of course. Thank you for your question. Yeah, what we find here, or I think in different developing countries, there's still this lack of confidence of women operating technologies. And that beliefs have been translated to the green growth fields. So when we go to the field, and when we are working also with the rural areas, which is these stereotypes are more accentuated. So we find that there's a belief that, no, this is something that men should be doing. Women are on the crops, but it's men who is in charge of technologies. So now when and our apprentices are so familiar to these rural areas. So when they go to the ground and they see women doing it, changing these realities, having this technical leadership, they start believing, oh, okay, I'm studying this. This thing that my family said that this is only for men is not that right. So I can also do this. And that's something they expressed to us. They told us, you know what? I want to be doing what she is doing, because now I know that there was one woman that told us, I want to be the next Colombian scientist, because I know scientist is for helping people now, and that women can do it.
That's great. That's super inspirational. Maybe what we can do, just to pick up on continue on that thread, is I'm going to go back to you, Dominica, because you were talking about animal science and kind of the equipment that's necessary that is actually gender responsive for women to be able to work with livestock rather than just small livestock. Can you add to that? Can you elaborate in terms of how well that worked in your case study?
Thank you, Nasa. So from that particular study, there were quite a number of male students in the animal science class and a few female students in that same class. So we wanted to find out why they were few. And there are one of the reasons was that it was actually difficult to deal with heavy equipment, with the heavy equipment that was a part of their study in animal science. And we wanted to find out further why it was difficult for them. And they told us that they were brought up in an environment where females were not encouraged to lift heavy weights. So their background then made them find it difficult to then work with the heavy equipment that was in animal science. So we also wanted then to find out further why it was difficult as well for females in general to be in this animal science discipline. And they assured us that one of the things that come with them working with heavy equipment is that there is stereotyping. So once you get into a science discipline, you work with heavy material or equipment, you also work with large livestock, there is stereotyping and stigmatization, and there are social sanctions that are associated with that at societal level, at family level. So as a result, most of the females would shun those disciplines because of the stereotyping that comes with working with men in those environments. There is labeling that comes with that as a result. So hence the need for gender responsive equipment that would then respond to the unique needs and experiences of these females. So that's how I would respond to your question, Nasa. Thank you.
I mean, there's a couple of aspects there. One is the equipment itself being responsive and appropriate, if I can put it that way. But the other is just the idea somehow that women can't do it. The societal and cultural perceptions of women's role in science and STEM, and you certainly talked about that, Dominika. How do you change that? How do you shift societal and cultural perceptions of women's roles in science? Can we dig into that a little bit more? Maybe I'll ask you that to start, Flora, because you haven't had a chance yet to speak.
Yeah, it's quite a hard thing to really change the society. But from where I sit, and even through the engagements that we have had with different stakeholders, I think one of the most important things is for a lot of awareness to be created so that then the different societal players can be aware of the fact that this is what is happening. We need to shift the direction as much as possible. But also in addition to that, there's need for us to develop more and more policies that can be able to support societal changes in one way or another. We need to also start asking ourselves, are we investing enough on what we are referring to as gender equality? Are we really investing at the universities or even in the research environments or even in our ministries, governments, in this particular change? Or is it just something that we are mentioning and we are not really fully investing our resources into that? There's also need for us to start asking ourselves, how do we start monitoring effectively the changes that we want to see in the society? And through that, we will be able to push towards tracking what is happening. And that may also help in terms of changing the societal aspect. Thank you.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about mentorship programs, but Paula or Dominika, do you want to come in on that question about the broader societal and cultural perceptions and change that we need?
Sure. I agree with my colleagues have said, but I also think that this organizational level is important. When we talk about involving stakeholders, it's also permeating these policies within stakeholders. We need more, not only in our case, environmental policies, not gender responsive environmental policies. Start permeating these different decision makers that can really support these strategies, these initiatives, this change.
Yeah, thank you. Dominika, did you want to come in?
Yes, Nasa, just to say, changing those norms requires a multi-stakeholder approach, and or changing attitudes, if I may say, require a multi-stakeholder approach, and also it requires addressing the root causes of those social and gender norms. It also requires, if I may say, long-term funding pipelines. If we are looking at it from the perspective of interventions by external stakeholders, who would include donor agencies, because we are dealing with attitudes that have been developed over a period of time. So for us to be able to deal with those and address the root causes, we cannot do that within, say, 6 months. We cannot even do that within a year. So that requires long-term interventions, dealing with the root causes, engaging with various stakeholders, including the institutions that continue to reinforce these social and gender norms. So that's how I would respond to your question, Nasa. We require gender transformative actions for us to be able to deal with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominica. Flora, let's go back to you and talk a little bit more about the gender supervision mentorship framework that you had approved at the East African level. Are there aspects about that you want to elaborate on? Like what really leads to better supervision and better mentorship?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Nasa. Some of the aspects touch on what is the attitude that we have with the different supervisors. We are aware of the fact that there are both men and women who supervise women. And what we realize is that at times the whole aspect of the gender that supervises or the gender that mentors was not necessarily a big issue. But the issue really came up in are they able to empathize? Are they able to be supportive? Do they have an understanding of that this woman needs more support based on different individual kind of aspects? And also the whole aspect of how do we build the capacity of the supervisors, of the mentors, so that then they are able to support the woman in a better way. The whole aspect of mentorship and its relationship to role modeling also came out quite strongly. And the fact that we need the mentors to really address those personal aspects that the mentee has brought up. The mentor also needs to identify what are these specific weaknesses that the mentee has or that the mentee needs to grow in. So it was more of an aspect of, does the mentor, does the supervisor understand the woman's perspective or the woman's needs? And are they able to apply different capacity strengthening aspects to be able to build and to push the woman to the next level? Thank you.
Thanks, Flora. So let's dig into that some more. Paula and Dominica, you're both leaders, women leaders in science as well. So what have you found in terms of what's effective to supervise and mentor women? What's needed both for women supervisors and men supervisors, with some examples perhaps. So Dominique, Paula, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. I think we need to supervise initiatives as a whole. I mean, we do have projects or gender initiatives, but what are the indicators of those initiatives? What are the real goals? Because maybe in that supervision, we realize that it's necessary to change, to have a different direction. It's not only the number of women that are being trained, is, as our colleague just mentioned, are we in these projects really leading this to develop women's skills, women's knowledge, covering women's needs? So I think something that we need to supervise is what kind of projects, what we call gender projects, are we putting on the ground? What are their real goals? What are their activities? How can we really supervise, because I don't believe supervision should be at the end. Supervision should be from the beginning. So we should really supervise what we are doing right now in our case and see if it is necessary to modify goals, indicators, some activities to really make this really gender responsive. And of course, continue monitoring that this is being fulfilled along the way.
Thank you, Paula. How about you, Dominica?
My word would be on supervision. What's important is not only to focus on the technical side of it, but the social aspects are quite critical. So supervision should not just focus on ensuring that the female student is appreciating the science regarding the discipline that they are enrolled in, but also deal with the social aspects of the background of this particular individual. So to me, this is quite critical, because without dealing with the social issues, we'll continue to face challenges with women and girls in science. So I'm bringing in the social element to supervision. Thank you, NASA.
Thanks, Dominica. And I'd like to go and talk about that social element a little bit more in terms of policies. Just before we do that, I do want to ask a question about inclusion, and I think I'm going to ask you this question, Paula. The indigenous population in Colombia is high, and so I wanted to ask you in your work, what have you found in terms of being able to create more inclusive and supportive environments for women in STEM, particularly those that are from rural or indigenous communities who face additional barriers? Oh, you're still on mute, Paula.
Sorry, Naz, could you rephrase the question? Sorry, I missed a part of the question. Yeah,
I was saying that the indigenous population in Colombia is quite high, and I imagine that you work with a lot of indigenous women. So my question was, what do we need to be, take a more inclusive and supportive approach to creating those environments where women from rural or indigenous communities that face additional barriers are feeling supported and are able to enter and excel in STEM careers?
Thank you. Okay, yes, we have a really diverse population here in Colombia, and indigenous, as you mentioned, is having really different kind of issues with gender, but also with other issues. So I think the most important thing is to really hear what they need and respect their culture, because we have witnessed some initiatives that trying to help them to become more environmental friendly go against their culture, and that women empowerment ends up being like a problem for women too. So the most important thing is to analyze what they really need and go gradually, respecting their norms, respecting their culture, and listening. They also have their own knowledge. So it's important to incorporate that knowledge and not impose what we as technicians believe, or what we as urban, people believe has to be done. I think that's the most important thing, to really work with them, not imposing.
Yeah, no, I love that answer about really understanding before coming and imposing solutions. Good. We are at 9 o'clock and the panel is just flying by. I wanted to, you all touched on kind of taking a more systemic approach, and you talked about policies as well. Let's start with the policy question. What sort of policies do we need in educational institutions and other institutions to advance gender equality in science? how do we address things? You talked about the particular needs of women, the unpaid burden of care, for instance, that women face, and that we work a lot on in IDRC. Some of my colleagues' programs doing excellent work. I wanted to ask you about that. What kind of policies have you seen in institutions that will help, and what else do we need to do? Let's start with you, Dominica, on this one.
Sorry, Nasa, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, my question was, what types of policies do we need in educational institutions that will really advance gender equality in STEM?
Thank you, Nasa. I think there are quite a number of policies, but most of them would actually be embraced within a gender and diversity policy. We need such a policy in all our institutions of higher learning. It would then provide for issues around enrollment, about gender responsive infrastructure, issues of gender responsive pedagogy, issues of females in leadership and role models. So it would be quite encompassing as a gender and diversity policy. But I also think in terms of the organizational culture, and generally ensuring that the environment is conducive, particularly to female students, would also need an anti-sexual harassment policy. That's quite important. But I think what I also need to emphasize is the existence of these policies is not enough. What we need is also to ensure that the stakeholders are aware of the provisions of these policies and that the policies are being implemented or enforced within the institutions. So I'm emphasizing implementation of those policies where they exist, so that they add value to what we want to achieve as gender responsive institutions. Thank you, Nasa.
Thanks, Dominica. You noted a really important issue. That's remains a big problem in the North and the South. So I'll ask Flora and Paula to talk about that as well. Creating environments where women feel safe and comfortable to be able to do their work, including anti-sexual harassment policies that are implemented and enforced. Well, what's your experience with that, Flora?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to touch on a program that I lead, which is the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, where we've come up with a position on how do we carry out, for example, selection of fellows, selection of students. So we have a policy around selection should take place in this way, and we have this particular percentage. I think it's 60-40 percentage, so that then we are not disadvantaging any particular group. Then we also have policies that touch on, or a position that touches on, how do we treat each of the groups. So I'll give an example. If we are having a workshop that's taking place, and we know that the woman may be disadvantaged in one way or another to attend the workshop, which may be taking 3-4 weeks, then we allow that particular woman who has just maybe delivered a child to come to the training with a minder. So in that way, we are providing an enabling environment to support the specific woman. But also in addition to that, if the individual woman was struggling during their time of pregnancy, then we give them something we refer to as a leave of absence, which does not prevent them from finishing the program in the required period of time. Policies to do with age in terms of selection. How do you deal with age issues? We know that there's a period within a woman's life that is really their reproductive period. And that may be around 25 to maybe about 40 or 45, somewhere around there. But the man at that time is busy with his, he goes on with his activities as usual. So in order to cater for the fact that indeed a woman may be going through, may have been left behind at a particular time of their reproductive period, then we enhance the age in which a student is selected who is a woman. And so we support them in that particular way. But other aspects that we can also think of is how do we help the woman be able to progress in terms of their careers. what we put in place to support them in that way. What role models do we have in place? Do we have time flexibility in the different activities around the woman? How do we deal with the fact that there are periods of time when a woman has to stay at home? And I'll give an example of what happened during the COVID time, where the gender that was really affected was the woman. And so in terms of progressing, the woman may not have been able to progress much. And so what we did as the CATA program is around that time, we gave mitigation funds so that the woman who had been affected can be able to have someone in their house to give the care that is needed at that time, while at the same time noting that they may have needed a bit more funds in terms of stipend to support them. Then we were able to support them in that way. I don't know whether that helps for now. I can go on and on, but I am trying to be mindful. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you so much for it. You outlined so many concrete ways in which women's particular needs can be better supported, and the ways they weren't in the past. Paula, do you want to pick up on any of those threads that Flora mentioned, or Dominica before, or anything additional that you want to say in terms of the types of concrete policies and practices that can better support women in science?
Sure, thank you. No, I totally agree with my colleagues. There's a lot of things to do. And what I find is that sometimes these policies, gender policies in educational institutions, are basically oriented to sexual harassment. And that's not bad, and it is necessary, of course. But it should, as my colleagues mentioned, it's necessary to include other aspects. What about women in STEM? What about the same opportunities to women in leadership positions, access to specialized training as professors or as students, and these kind of things that are like ignored in the way policies are written or are being directed, but that we need to cover too. So I think that's important to really make this inclusive, and also the way we are operationalizing policies. We need to also to supervise that we are working on all different aspects, and not only, in some cases, universities here only have these protocols for sexual harassment, as I mentioned, but what about the other things that are also important and necessary if we want to really work in gender equity in STEM? Thank you.
Okay, great. I mean, you all came up with such concrete examples, frameworks on gender and inclusivity in science, anti-sexual harassment policies, budgeting for the additional and disproportionate care that disproportionate burden that women face in terms of care that was even more pronounced in COVID, but of course it's already there. And beyond women in STEM, but women as leaders. So thanks for that. I think we have time for one question, at least from the audience. And I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the screen because I'm just looking down at my phone where my colleague sent the question. So the question is, I'm just going to read it out to all of you panelists. What does gender responsive / transformative science and social infrastructure ecosystem look like? It's quite a broad question. So we're getting to the ecosystem point. And I think that it kind of overlaps with the question that I had was, you've all talked about the need for taking a systemic approach. How do we do that? Who are the stakeholders involved? How do we build the connections between them so that we take a systemic approach to advancing gender equality in STEM? So we do need to wrap soon, so I'm going to ask you all to be fairly concise, but we'll start with you, Flora.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. As the question was being read out, I think my mind just went back to the whole aspect of how do we, as a gender responsive kind of system, we need to ask ourselves, what do we have in terms of structures that can be able to support this particular gender responsiveness? Do we understand the culture? Do we understand the values of the individual women? Do we have we planned are we intentional in terms of meeting their specific needs? Do we have the resources in place so that then we are able to support the woman more? Do we know how to motivate them? The motivation of the man and the woman may be very different when it comes to their desire to proceed and become a professional or even to grow in the same area. So what is it that will motivate them? So being able to respond in terms of motivation, in terms of resources that is needed, or even investment into that, or even in terms of understanding what are these cultures, what are these values that need to be supported even in a woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Flora. Dominica?
Thank you, Nasa. I would add to say what we need is value-based leadership. In our institutions, leaders that value gender equality in general and also in science. That would be our starting point, because without political will, we cannot talk about gender transformative institutions. Like I indicated, to transform our institutions in some cases would require support financially. So without that political will, without that value-based leadership, we'll not be able to devote resources for gender transformation within our institutions. We would need institutions transformed in terms of the workplace culture. We would need infrastructure that is responding to the unique needs of male and female students in their diversity. We would need stakeholder engagement, because some of the issues do not only require the university or the institution on its own, but it would require multi-stakeholder engagement to deal with. So I would emphasize on value-based leadership as the basis for gender transformative institutions. Thank you, Nasa.
Dominica, you said something so important, value-based leadership. How do you create that value-based leadership?
It comes with appreciating. Maybe I will respond by giving a concrete example. That, for example, in Zimbabwe, where I am, our constitution has one of its values is equality, gender equality in particular. So that's a value that I believe was brought up in the constitution by the majority of the population. So it means even in terms of operationalizing that value, as institutions of higher learning, we should be able to operationalize the constitution in our institutions. So we should make it our culture, we should make it our value. So it starts with ensuring that it's also one of the values of the institution. Then from there, we also educate the university community about the values of the institution, which include gender equality. So once we institutionalize those values, they become part and parcel of what we do on a day-to-day basis. We report on them, like in the case of Women's University in Africa, we have one of our strategic focus areas within our 2023 to 2027 strategy is gender equality. So we put that deliberately as one of our key areas that we are tracking throughout the period of the strategy. So it becomes institutionalized. It is not left to an individual, but it becomes the responsibility of everyone, with job descriptions also incorporating this particular dimension. So that's how it can become institutionalized as a value. We should make it a point that it's not a responsibility for one person, but it's everybody's responsibility. By ensuring that we have a policy in place, we emphasize it in our strategic documents, we report on it in our meetings, and it becomes a culture within the institution. Thank you, Nasa.
Thanks, Dominica. So institutionalizing values that are going to lead to gender equality in STEM. And you talked about how it's not one person's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. Paula, do you want to pick up on that? Who's everybody? What stakeholders are we talking about? And then add anything additional that you wanted to say on that question that was posed about systemic change.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. This is not a responsibility of one person. It seems that sometimes when we talk about gender and you go to a university or an educational institution and you ask of what you are doing as an institution, they tell you, oh, we have a gender office. But it's not the responsibility of the gender office. That's not the solution. We have to bring other stakeholders, our faculties, our even external stakeholders that work with us all the time in the university. So I think that's definitely a point. When we talk about a system, we talk about interdisciplinarity. As Dominica said, it says social sciences is not only gender office with the social professionals here, social scientists, not. It's also engineers from the Faculty of Engineering also working on this. But at the same time, it's also talking about interdisciplinarity, but also internalization, values, but values in our own faculties. So if we change the values of we are not making engineering, we are making social engineering. If we start changing that, it is easier then to change at the heart of our organization, to really internalize it in these core values. That's it.
Okay, great. So just before I turn to you, Anna, just a signal to you that we're going to be ready for you soon in terms of a 5-minute set of observations as a discussant. I think that we have time to give the panelists 30 seconds, 1 minute each. Anything else you want to say that you were thinking about during the panel that we weren't able to pick up? So it's kind of your closing remark. One last thing you want to leave the audience with. I'm going to start with you, Flora.
Thank you for that. I think for me, one of the most important aspects is that in all that we do, we have to bring all the stakeholders together and ensure that they are contributing to the discussion that we have in terms of the change that we are expecting. But also beyond that, we need to keep on asking ourselves, at what level, how can we approach the change that we want to take place? Do we need to begin at a strategic position, maybe regional level, and move that to the national level and institutional level? Because unless we have a change taking place from the top, it's highly possible that we'll come up with all these policies, all these documents, and nothing will be done. We'll continue saying, yes, we need the change, but nothing is happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Flora. Dominica?
Thank you, Nasa. I would say we have, as institutions of higher learning, focused on developing modules, gender modules for our students. And we have educated our students on gender issues, raised awareness on gender issues, but we have not done much to target our staff members. So I think it's high time we also have interventions that are meant at capacitating our staff members, both administrative staff and also academic staff in this area of gender. For academics, we can also broaden that to include gender responsive pedagogy, but for the non-teaching staff, we can focus on gender equality and inclusiveness in terms of raising awareness so that they're able to engage with our stakeholders, both internal and external stakeholders. They can relate well with them from those informed positions. So I'm emphasizing on capacity strengthening of teaching and non-teaching staff on gender equality and inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominica. And last word to you, Paola, from the panelist side.
Thank you. I think that we should also pay attention to this evidence gap that we have in terms of micro, small, and medium enterprises. These kind of industries are 90% in developing countries. So our women in STEM fields are likely to be working on those kind of industries. And their women tend to be stuck in non-STEM fields, even if they have been graduated from these careers. So I think we should pay more attention to this gap and start see how we can work on this. And also, I think we shouldn't give up. I know sometimes it's frustrating because we see like this is a long way to go, but I think every step we take, we get closer to the goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. All right, Anna, can I turn it to you? Rich discussion. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Nasser. This was really excellent. Very, very, very pleasant to listen to, and also realistic, but at the same time optimistic. So this is really what resonates the most with me here. Coming from UNESCO side and picking up on what Flora said, even more than a regional strategy or more than a regional framework, from our perspective, it is important to have some kind of global framework around these issues. And this is what we've tried to do with this call to action that we launched exactly 1 year ago for the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And what for me was interesting from the discussions today is that some of these key pillars of the call to action that we issued from UNESCO side and based on stakeholder consultation, we really highlighted here. It's the question of stereotypes, it's the question of educational pathways, it's the question of institutional changes, and how do we make sure that the system changes so that the woman can integrate the science system and more likely strive in this system, continue their careers, advance in their careers, and really contribute as much as possible to the advancement of science. Another issue I think that was interesting and that again resonates with us a lot is this idea that it is not an individual issue, it is not a feminist issue, it is a societal issue. We need more women in science because that will give us better science and it will give us more solutions to the problems that we are currently facing. More innovation, more different angles and perspectives. So it really is incredibly important, as Paula was saying, not to give up, continue talking about these things and continue raising awareness, and also continue saying why this is extremely important in the different fields, across the different sectors. And again, this is something that we try to do this year for the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, when we launched this big communication campaign just a couple of days ago with the hashtag Every Voice in Science, where the idea is to ask everyone, what would the world look like if we had more women in science? So again, it's not just because it's a good thing, it is because it's important, and that will indeed change the way that we do things in the science system and for society. And here for the campaign, again, this is where I would like to thank IDRC again, because we did this campaign also with support from IDRC, and we hope that the participants who helped to publish the report will also be very active in promoting the campaign, in posting, in raising your voices, and really demonstrating, what can we do when we have more women in science. I was just looking through the most recent post, and it's really incredible. The feedback that we are receiving, the expansion of this campaign, I think is very, very, very important. It also makes us understand that there is a huge community of practice around the issues of promotion of women in science that need to be brought together regularly. Again, from the UNESCO side, we have now created this LinkedIn group for everybody who is interested to be involved, where we can share information, best practices, challenges, where we can keep being connected and keep kind of feeding from and learning from each other as we move forward. We have some working groups also open to everyone that are looking into these three pillars, breaking down stereotypes, looking into educational pathways and also institutional changes. So again, an invitation to all of you to join us and try to see how we can advance this as a global movement, which is also extremely important. We've seen that there is also political willingness to take up these issues. But it's also true that I think policymakers are looking into different options and strategies, and also different ways to measure the impact. We do lack today a way of measuring the impact of our policy interventions. We can, yes, just have a look at the number of women in different positions, but still we will see the leaky pipe, and we will see a lot of different challenges that we are facing. So the question is also, do we also have a good framework for measurements of impact, both in terms of policy interventions and also in terms of having women in science, and what does that mean as an impact for science systems into society. So just the last maybe call to all to continue with the excellent efforts. I think it's very important that we talk about the good things that people are doing, that we have a space to share, that we have a space to be heard also. And really, in terms of UNESCO, gender equality is one of our cross-cutting priorities across education, science, culture, communication, media. So it's really something that we promote in all of the different sectors, and in particular, gender equality in science is something that is very dear to us, and we are very much looking forward to continuing to work with all of you and try to find some innovative ways to make the ecosystem change so that we can move forward in the right direction. So thanks so much, Nasser, for moderating, for IDRC, for organizing, all the panelists also for the very insightful contributions. It was a real pleasure, and we really hope that we will keep with this discussion and action in terms of closing the general vacancy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anna. And I do really want to say what a pleasure it is to be collaborating with UNESCO on this. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you. What a great discussion. I learned so much. And as you said, Anna, I mean, real concrete examples about things that are helping training, TVET training in rural areas to help women be able to participate in the in green industries through real hands-on experiential learning, as you said, Paola. The importance of supervision and mentoring and doing it well to enable women not just to enter postgraduate careers, but training, but to stay in and excel. And things like gender audits to really identify in a comprehensive way what are the gaps, and then use that to improve policies both in institutions and in industry. But then, of course, beyond that, taking a systemic approach by really institutionalizing these changes in society as a whole. So that was a fabulous discussion, a reminder about the book that will feature the case studies from today's discussion. As we close, I just wanted to share IDRC's future directions, because we're committed to this area of advancing gender equality in STEM, and informed by the recommendations that were co-developed with our partners last summer. The future investments are going to focus on enhancing data availability and understanding of intersectional barriers, particularly at high-risk moments for dropout and workforce transitions, scaling scholarship models to increase visibility and leadership of marginalized groups in higher education and STEM industries, while integrating gender-responsive and intersectional pedagogies to strengthen pathways from early education onward, and supporting the development of evidence-based STI inclusion policies that are really informed by scientists from marginalized communities. So stay tuned for research calls on these critical issues. I'd like to invite you now to join me in thanking these amazing panelists, Dominica, Flora, Paula, Anna as a discussant, my colleague Matilda, who presented the overview. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, dear audience, for being part of this important conversation. So let's remain optimistic and keep working on all these issues together. And I wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.